Welcome back to the Better Thinkers podcast. I'm shooting live right now in my yard in the Longway, Malawi, where I've been teaching just over a year. Things have paused a bit with the Better Thinkers project just because I started the school year and it's always busy getting your class up and going. But I still have some engagement. I just kind of slowed down a bit with writing, and I haven't interviewed anyone on the podcast for just well over a month. But I've also just spending time reading. A couple of books I'm reading are The Tyranny of Metrics. I'm reading this because it just talks about how metrics are kind of taking over a lot of institutions, that they're trying to measure things to, I suppose, prove value in some way. And but there's cost to that. It tends to avoid things that aren't so easy to measure but still have value, and it tends to put too much meaning into things that are easily measured. So that's an interesting one that I think applies to schools today, especially schools that are branding themselves as data driven. Of course, there are benefits to collecting data as well at a broad scale, so I'm going to explore that in a blog down the road. I'm also reading Peter Kingsnorth's Against the Machine. First of all, it's just really well written. He's an engaging writer. I find it hard to put down. But he's just talking about this whole technological, economic atmosphere that we're in right now that tends to be restricting the human story, and kind of narrowing what it means to experience as a human. So I think it's a really engaging read. I recommend that as well. Another book that I'm almost finished is Thomas Falkenberg. He's the editor for Well-Being and Well-Becoming in Schools, and they explore the concept of well-being and how to implement that into schools at a school district level, school level, classroom level. And exploring across cultures, indigenous cultures, etc. So that's really interesting because I do think well-being is such a hot topic in schools right now. But what I really appreciate is Falkenberg's essay for his model well-being kind of has meaning at the center of it, which aligns with my thinking about what well-being is really. It's about just finding meaning, purpose in one's life, and I think a lot of schools are lacking that as well. So if you're going to be focusing on well-being, it has to go beyond just sharing your feelings and circle time, and it's about creating purpose in schools. And so I'll be writing about that in the future as well. So some exciting things for Better Thinkers. If you are a reader or a listener or now watching the podcast, I appreciate everyone who's taken interest in my work, and I'm learning a lot from people that are engaging as well, so I appreciate the engagement. My guest today is Karen Spinner. She's a Princeton grad, worked in copywriting for large companies, very well-known companies for many years, and has recently transitioned more to development and coding and developing programs that I suppose can make our lives a little bit easier. But a lot of it centers around our experiences with AI, and she was, or she is, a very knowledgeable person, very, very smart and kind, and was very generous with her time with me yesterday, just giving us insights on the economy, how she approaches learning with her kids in the age of AI, and just sharing some of her stories about being a small business owner, living on a farm in Arkansas, kind of just wearing a lot of hats. So my big takeaway with this one is that I think in this age of AI, we all have to be experimenting and trying projects and learning, thriving forward as humans in ways that utilizes AI but also goes beyond AI. So here's number 11 with Karen Spinner. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for your answers to your questions. So I looked over it. It seems like you've done a lot of different things in your life. I also just glanced over your LinkedIn profile and I saw that it seems your career started off in copywriting and you've kind of transitioned more into, I think, the same space, but it is more software development in some way. Can you maybe introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I think one of the challenges is that, I'm kind of exploring different avenues. I don't necessarily update my LinkedIn profile as often as I should. But my background is indeed in copywriting. So I've done writing and content strategy for big companies. I think like I can mention like Adobe was one of them. And as like not as an employee, but at an agency that worked with like Adobe and HP and Confluent and IBM, like there's some large entities. And I had a director role there up until, and during kind of my last year or so at that agency, one of my jobs was to research AI and what AI could potentially do for the agency and potentially do for its customers. And in the course of my research, and it was interesting because my employer ultimately did not want to run with any of the stuff that I developed, but I did build a writing platform for basically replicating the kind of the agency copywriting process inside of an AI studio. So basically, you would have to go in and you would complete a creative brief, just like you would with a human freelancer, and then you would get an outline, just like you would with a freelancer. And then you would get kind of like a draft with linked sources, similar to what you'd get from a freelancer, except not quite as good. And you could set up style guides so the AI would write really closely to what you wanted to do. And so when I parted ways with my agency, I thought, oh, well, it would be kind of cool to market this thing that I've just been using myself. And that was kind of a, neat, interesting experience because I did some market testing with Google Ads. And I found that the people who the people like me, basically like serious writers with like corporate jobs and things like that, absolutely did not want to use AI to produce any content. They're like, oh no, that's terrible. There are copyright issues. We could get in trouble. Plus, it's cheating. And there's a very, very mixed and negative reaction to the particular concept behind the tool. So I was like, okay, all right. So there's not a lot of demand from people like me, that I'm an outlier. And then I looked when I was advertising it on Google, I found that the people who really were interested in testing the tool were students, 18 and 17, 18, 19-year-olds, people wanting to cheat on their essays. And as a mom, I was like, oh man, this is just like not the target market I want to be dealing with. I still have the tool operational for my own use, but I basically shut down all marketing and promotion and just said, okay, moving on from that project. And since I've been, on Substack, I actually started my Substack in order to have some really kind of recent writing samples just for my freelance business. So people could see what I might write about that wouldn't necessarily be something that I created and not something that went through like 15 rounds of corporate review and got changed beyond all recognition. And so some of the stuff I wrote about really are kind of more technical topics and some of my experiences with building with AI and building different tools for my own use. And in the process of that experience, I wrote a note about how I was stressed out by all my Substack newsletter subscriptions and that I would go into my email and I would see like 1,000 notes coming in from Substack and it was overwhelming. And so I ended up building a tool that lets you import all of your Substack subscriptions and then run a digest so you can just get a list of what all your subscriptions published over the week. And now it's set up so you can email it to yourself. And if you want to do research based on Substack newsletters, I've got a vector database of like about 30,000 recent articles. So you can research it in a way that's a bit more efficient than going through Google. So that's kind of my main software development project I have going on right now, which is just something I'm doing. I'm sort of doing it building in public. So I'm doing a lot of posts about all of the ups and downs and bugs and things like that. And that's something that I'm doing kind of in parallel with my kind of writing business.
First of all, can you explain to us what content writing is for a big company? It's about public engagement. You're just getting your brand out there. There's a whole structure from the top to bottom. Is that generally broad strokes what content writing is?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because every large company has their own unique approach to content. So specifically, what I would do with large companies is I would help them figure out what they would want to write, because sometimes you would have like a product team and maybe they have a few different partners, systems that integrate with their, with their product, and they're like, okay, so how can we develop content that combines information from all of these different entities. And so I would help companies with challenges like that and figure out, what are some reasonable things that would meet their criteria in terms of including various partner solutions, and also be interesting to the audience they were trying to reach. And so in addition to kind of coming up with ideas and content plans, which would be kind of the sequence in which content might be created, I would then also build out the different content. And as you suggested, there is kind of a sales funnel. So people at the top of the sales funnel are people who don't know you. Then you're doing a lot of brand awareness and advocacy and basic info. And it's interesting because right now we see a lot of folks building a lot less this top of funnel content, because a lot of that is now answered by large language models. So like a basic how to and kind of introductory info, that's covered by a lot of different sources already. And then as you go down the funnel, you get more and more specific and more problem focused. And I think when I was working with large companies, I'd say maybe about 50% of what I would do would be sort of top of funnel, which was educational stuff that companies would brand and put out there and use to kind of gain trust. And then half would be really super hyper specific product focused content that would look at like maturity models and granular product features and specifically how something might be implemented and what the ROI would be.
All the different people you had to meet with for the product that was being branded or promoted. What were some things, say 5 years ago, that could just be cut out now, but still preserve that kind of authenticity of that content?
Well, I think it's interesting because even based on a lot of my experiments with AI, I wouldn't necessarily look to it as like a first resort as far as writing a copy draft. I think it's got a good place from an accessibility and like a language standpoint. So if if somebody is just trying to rough something out, and let's say you've got a team with people with multiple languages and you're trying to boil everything down into English, AI can just help from a translation standpoint and help folks who like maybe English is their third or fourth language, help them get that information in a form that the rest of the team can understand. So I think that's one good use of AI. When I was working with larger companies and AI was in play, typically it would be used for transcriptions. So instead of having to get a human person to transcribe a 3-hour long interview, that you could have AI do it, and you'd sacrifice some accuracy, but if you knew the subject matter and you were indeed the person conducting the interview, for me it was great. I was like, okay, no more transcriptions. Loved it. And the other thing that AI would be used for is outlines. So you could write an outline yourself and then ask AI to like, hey, please come up with 3 or 4 different structures. So from more of like a brainstorming standpoint. And you could also, and again, for some, in some situations, like if you are working on a super top secret product that has not been launched, you cannot put any of this information into AI because you don't want any risk that this is going to get pulled into their training data, even by accident. So whatever I did with AI was usually pretty severely circumscribed based on the contract that we'd have with each customer. So I didn't use AI for a lot of writing, in that sense. It was more of like a support tool.
That's how I use it now. I've been a bit off of blog writing or newsletter writing, but it's any time that I've tried to just get AI to write for me, it just doesn't work, right? You have to, the input you put in has to be all yours anyways. And whatever, it tends to smooth things out in a way that looks too crisp or has too many M dashes, and so you have to, I might ask it for How does it flow? Does it signpost next to the next paragraph? Is what suggestions might you give me to edit it as if it was another human editor or giving me revisions? But in the end, it gives you insights in just how you would change it. But it's still your own words, and it's still a long process. I at least the way I've been using it, I don't feel like AI speeds up the writing process. It just helps you make it a bit better. But that said, I find on my phone that I get a lot of AI articles. If it's even like
Mm.
Sports Illustrated, I'm sure that they have AI writing some of their articles because they're so specific, and some of the titles are the catchy ones that they bait you into clicking. And you feel the voice is automated sometimes, and so
Mm.
and then I unsubscribe from those particular articles. So I still want authenticity coming from me and
Mhm.
and when I'm reading as well. I don't want it to be counterfeit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's also one of the challenges of content being produced by large organizations that have to make money. So, Sports Illustrated, they've got to pay their people. They're trying to increase their margins. And so they're experimenting, I'm sure, with AI to, okay, so how can we produce some of this content without having to pay humans? And I think a lot of it comes down to a cost standpoint. And I think, I unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot of AI generated content out there that isn't so great. And so I think, and this, I'm not talking about a translation of somebody who wrote something in another language and it's their original thought and it's just AI being used to translate it. That you'll still get a little bit of funky AI voice, but that's not really the same thing as a lot of organizations like just mass producing AI generated content in a lot of cases in order to, and I think there's less of this now, but I think until recently we saw a lot of people doing that to game search engines. So folks would be like, okay, we're going to write 3,000 word AI generated post for every long tail keyword under the sun and put it up there.
So just pollute the environment with slop that will basically pull people into the attention economy, right? It's just like just throw your colors out there and people will see you basically.
Well, the other thing that I notice is that one place where there's a lot of AI generated content is actually video scripts. So YouTube video scripts. My kids watch too much YouTube, and they have these AI generated narratives that they get sucked into. And there is, I think, from a pollution standpoint, I think it's actually more pronounced on YouTube than it is in let's say written content. So that's just, and again, that's also why we have screen time limits for the kids.
I'm on YouTube a fair bit. I don't know if I see that myself. So I'm wondering if you have any specific channels that have that, and not send it to me now, but personally on aside from this episode, you just send it to me because I'm curious about it. Because I didn't.
Oh, I'll have my son I'll have my son recommend some stuff, and he got really super into brain rot for a while. So he was watching all the brain rot videos, and I think I created a brain rot video for him. And then
I
showed
guess
how,
it's a learning opportunity, right?
yeah, because I was like, okay, well let me show you how we can create our own brain rot with AI, and what you need to do in order to like take the short clips, because I didn't want to actually spend for like a, so I was going with like a low end video generation account. So I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do with like 2 snippets of 5 second Sora videos with creatures that don't look quite exactly alike. And here's how you use a video editing software to splice them together. And so I
And
think,
does he go ahead?
no, and I was going to say, and I think the video technology has advanced a whole lot just over the past few months, even. But at least, so there was definitely a like more of a manual component as far as creating the brain rot, and he got to kind of see the process, and and then he wasn't interested enough to actually build them himself, but I think it was useful for him to kind of see what how the brain rot was made.
And does he? you still have interest in brain rot videos, or does he now kind of feel there's not as much value to it now that he kind of sees and a sense of meaninglessness behind it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and it's just like with a lot of stuff with kids, he got bored and moved on. And so now he's heavily into funk, PHONK, and that's a kind of a synthesized rap style of music that he's getting into with his buddies. But I mean, I think there's going to be, I mean, there's going to be all kinds of interesting kind of cultural changes out there. I'm just hoping that folks are going to gravitate towards content and music and art that has some kind of human aspect into it, whether it's humans using the AI in an interesting way or people just actually building their own stuff. Or, but I think outsourcing all of our creativity to AI is probably not a good pathway.
Yeah. And I think people, I mean, seeing live music first, I think what AI can do is it just kind of push us to boundaries and then we take it from there. And I think that's where people will find value, is they see people doing that. The creative aspect is still coming from some kind of meaningful human origin, I suppose. I wanted to come back to, you said your current project where you're talking about you subscribe to all these Substack articles. Part of that's reciprocation, I'm sure. I don't know how many followers you have right now, but I tend, when I get a follower, I almost always follow them back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe half the time or a third of the time. And I do, like, I'm just like you. I look at my inbox and it's just like, what if someone actually emailed me, you know, and it's not just a newsletter. So, so you've devised this, this program that kind of consolidates that. I'm wondering, because that could be useful for emails as well. Like one of my oldest Gmail accounts has all kinds of subscriptions coming into it. And then rather than funneling it to a folder, it wouldn't be great if it was just into one email. So
Yeah,
I kind of get a sense that what you're kind of cornering right here is especially talking about your son, is that we can use AI filters in a way. And I get a sense that you're into engineering that yourself.
Yeah, well, it's funny because having spent so long as a copywriter, for me, I'm like, oh, this is really, I find engineering kind of fun because I haven't been doing it for years and years. And I find for me, that's one of the aspects of AI that's been the most interesting, because I don't have a serious development background. I have built like small mobile apps for my kids that they would just live on the development environment. I would never push them into the Apple Store. Having just kind of, I'd say, a limited programming, kind of a DIY type of background, I was able to really build functional things very, very quickly with AI. And granted that there would be, usually you'd have like 80% of it there, and then there'd be like 20%, including like a bunch of fatal bugs that you'd have to go research and fix. And if you're ever going to share the software with other people, you've got to care about security and making sure that the way you're sharing your software is going to be scalable, so that you don't have multiple people using it and it crashes and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of stuff to learn, but I've found it fun. And it's interesting because I wonder, I look at how serious coders use AI, and I feel like for them, it's probably more like AI is for me for writing, that they maybe deploy it to fix a few things or go and, clean up old code, document old code, run automated tests and things like that. But they may not necessarily be doing what I'm doing, which is actually making it build some stuff from scratch and then going in and fixing it.
When did you start getting into coding?
Let's see. I think this was during COVID, when I had a lot of time on my hands at home with my kids, and so I just ended up learning an Apple language called SwiftUI, and ended up building a few small things for them, and I thought it was interesting, and sort of kept up. Like I build my own like little workout trackers and things like that, and kept that up until I encountered AI, and then decided that would be a fun thing to research.
Now I've dabbled a bit myself, but nowhere near your level. I mean, I've done a Python course.
Mm-hmm.
One of 4 parts. I think it was University of Michigan. They do it. It's time consuming though, right? And I don't know what your schedule is like, but for me as a teacher, I'm exhausted at the end of the day, and I have a 2.5-year-old son, and
Oh, yeah.
I live in a country that things aren't always like the power has been going out a lot here. But
Mm.
um, I, I guess like I'm wondering, like, how much time do you spend learning how to code or use AI as a hobby, or is it's kind of blending in? It is not a hobby anymore. It is something that you have numerous projects going. So lots, like how many hours a day?
I mean, in terms of actually learning to code, I think I took I too have taken some basic Python classes, and the way I've approached it is if I'm working on I probably spend like maybe 30 minutes if I'm like looking up syntax or something like that. Like not very much time at all. I mostly will look at AI code, and then I will research stuff when I find I don't understand what's going on in it. So if I see like, oh, is recommending this library. I've never seen it before. Let me go look that up. Or if something is malfunctioning, in which case I will do a lot of research to make sure that the bug is fixed, and also that I understand how the bug was fixed, which is also really important for just knowing what the heck is going on in your software. It can't be a mystery.
So you spend a lot of time is probably the
Yeah,
answer. But you're into
yeah.
it. You seem quite passionate about it.
And I think some of this is I'm hoping to be able to monetize, one or more of my tech projects. I think that would be fun since freelance writing is a challenging thing to do right now in terms of the way AI has impacted search. So that until we had Google doing AI overviews and trying to funnel all its traffic in there was a lot of opportunity for companies to write lots and lots and lots and lots of blog posts. And they would put those blog posts up online, and those blog posts would drive lots of traffic to websites. So until maybe about 2 years ago, there was a huge demand for freelance writing and content assistance and things like that. And over time, though, as we've seen AI get out there, we've seen, okay, so if somebody wants to create a lot of maybe not so great content, they can use AI to do it. At the same time, we've seen Google move towards using AI as a core component of its search platform. So if you search for something, you're going to get an AI overview. Then you're going to get a bunch of Reddit stuff. Then you're going to get a bunch of ads. And then down at like maybe at the very bottom of the page, you're going to see like the blue links that we used to see that are heading towards articles that people have written that scored well in SEO.
Hmm.
So if you're a big company, it no longer makes a lot of sense to spend money on blog posts and other content because it's the likelihood that somebody is going to A, see it, and B, click through to your site is like getting really low. And so that has drastically cut the demand for writing services. And what I see moving forward is people are going to be spending more money on distribution because now the big challenge is how can you get somebody to see your content? If you're on LinkedIn, it's a pay to play environment. You can't just put something up there and if you have 100,000 followers, maybe it'll get served up to them, maybe. But it seems like we're really heading to a place where content discovery is going to be very much pay to play.
So in terms of distribution, just to clarify, companies would have to pay search engines in a way to either up their availability of their content or their brand or their website, or you have to kind of spam other people who have a lot of followers or traffic on the internet kind of thing.
Well, I think that we are already at a place that if you want to be visible in Google and you want to get traffic from Google, you have to buy ads. You probably can still get some organic traffic, and this is like if you are a legacy organization and you have a good SEO presence, you're still going to be getting some traffic from that, but not nearly as much. If you look at the coverage of even like The Guardian or like Business Insider or like publications, you'll see lots of stories about how their traffic is just wildly down. So I think Google really is pay to play right now, that if you want to be seen up at the top of the results, you've got to pay. And my best guess is that we're going to see that happening in AI models like ChatGPT, where AI models don't really, people use them for discovery, but they're not really sending people out any place. And I think there will be like native. I think Perplexity is starting to offer the ability to do some shopping inside of their AI powered search engine, and I feel like that's going to be every place very soon.
Interesting, yeah. And you think about products online that have star ratings, right? Presumably rated by users who bought the product, and it's great because it's got 4.9 rating. But those can be, I suppose, artificial as well in a way.
That's another big problem is fake reviews. Because now if you're I mean, there are always unscrupulous people who are going to do that, but AI gives them this really powerful tool in order to be unscrupulous on a vaster scale. And, and so I think like review pollution with AI is a huge problem that you can't necessarily trust that, oh, all these 5-star reviews, are they real? We can't tell anymore. I think the one area with search that is going to be less impacted by AI is local search. So if you're looking for something like in your specific town, your specific county, I see that staying fairly stable. And that for folks starting like a small business, it's like if you want discovery, ideally, if you can make your business something that is got a local component and you can get yourself a Google business profile and, focus your content, everything super hyper local. I think that's probably the one remaining kind of Google SEO opportunity out there that's accessible for somebody who would be starting fresh.
Right. So I've never been to Arkansas, but if I'm driving through Arkansas and my kids want a strawberry sundae and I am somewhere in the rural and in a rural part of Arkansas, if I Google strawberry sundae, it'll bring me to the nearest kind of ice cream shack kind of thing.
Yeah, that you'll get a map, and I did this, like, my husband and I along to, like, maybe, like, 8 or 9 years ago, we had a pasture-raised beef business on our farm, and we advertised the beef on Facebook and on Google, and we would ship it to people in different places. We would get some dry ice from the local store. We were never big enough to get our own dry ice order, but then we'd put it in these insulated boxes, and we'd ship it by hand you know, all over the place. And the way we started out is we had like a local business profile in our small town. So we started doing a lot of local deliveries of beef. And then based on that, we were able to kind of expand out. And the way people found us outside of our local area where we didn't have any kind of a footprint was 100% ads. I just ran ads. The reason why we closed that down is that when COVID hit, all the local beef processors basically were shut down. And so then we had no place to take the beef. Then when processors opened back up, there were still a lot of industrial processors that were shut down. We saw people with like serious industrial farms coming in and using the little local processors to process their animals. And it got to a point where it's like is not, the processing infrastructure just wasn't there. So we had to stop.
And that's still the case, or is it opened up again?
It still has some, usually will be like a 6 to 12 month waiting list if you want to take a cow in to some of the processors in my area. And it's just not super predictable. So we ended up selling our herd and, kind of getting out of that as a business because we couldn't necessarily afford to have like 80 head of cattle if we weren't selling beef at the same time. They eat a lot of hay in the winter.
Right. And if you can't sell them to pay for more hay, then I guess they're just mooching off you, those cows, eh?
Yeah,
I
the
guess.
economics were unsustainable, and I mean they were, we kept them in a pasture where again as they were pasture raised, they were not in like a lot or anything like that. It was a lovely picturesque, like 70 acres that they wandered around on, and unfortunately it's like with a I mean, it was very educational kind of doing the small farm thing because the margins also are super low and everything is massively impacted by the weather too. Like your hay prices, like for us, hay was the number one cost. And if we had a drought or some kind of issue and the hay price jacks up, then, then you're not going to make any money on your cattle,
So
even if you.
would larger farms or larger operations be able to, I guess, manage that a bit better?
Yeah, well, typically, if you're larger, you can operate on a smaller margin because then you're still the amount of money that you're getting in is still going to be, a little bit bigger. So, and you can also start dealing, getting economies of scale. So if you're a big farm, then maybe you can buy a whole lot of hay all at once and you can pay less per bale of that hay. And all of your inputs are going to be cheaper because you're buying them in bulk. And then you can also implement different systems in order to manage your livestock. And we also didn't necessarily, we were, we didn't want to manage the livestock. We didn't want to cut off their horns or, we were kind of hippie style farmers. So which unfortunately was not ideal, like from a profitability standpoint, it's didn't work.
You're mentioning in your notes about AI risks damaging the economy, and I wonder if this is a bit of a segue from small operations like you had or small business owners, or is there a connection with how AI is disrupting the economy or changing the economy now and how that could affect the little guy, so to speak?
Well, it's interesting because it's a little hard to sort of parse out how AI is truly affecting the economy versus all kinds of other things like various policy uncertainties and interest rates and more traditional macroeconomic forces. So company says, "Oh, let's see, we're laying people off because of AI," and there's thousands of headlines like that. But then you dig into it, and the question is it actually AI, or are they just using this as a cover to outsource, or did they just have a bad quarter for some, because of a weather related reason, and they're using AI as an excuse because it's more palatable to their investors? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what the true impact of AI is. I think there are enough studies out there showing that it is having a bad effect on people coming out of college, essentially, like less experienced workers, that there's less demand. And so because companies are using AI to do some of the, really sort of basic things that they would have an intern do. But I think some of the, and there are companies, if you listen to CEO interviews, I think there is a lot of intent out there to apply AI in ways that will drastically reduce the workforce. Now, the two questions would be, can AI in its current state actually do that? And I think it looks like a lot of AI projects in big corporate environments are not doing so well. So it's an open question. Can you really, can you do that with AI? And then the other question would also be, if the technology advances a little bit and companies learn how to implement it in ways that really do allow them to fire a bunch of people, should we be doing that? Is that going to be really sustainable even for these large companies themselves? Because let's say every company is able to automate away like 50% of their jobs. And then we have this massive pool of, like, I think the CEO of Anthropic had predicted like at least a 20% unemployment rate, something really bad. And ultimately, somebody has to pay for the products that all these companies are producing. And if nobody has jobs, nobody's going to be able to pay for the products, and it all kind of grinds to a halt. So I don't know if there's a lot of forward thinking going on in terms of how folks are developing AI. And, I think there's a lot of looking towards the next cool new release and not a lot of bigger picture thinking around it.
Yeah, and I think another aspect might be like you still have to like who takes over the company eventually, You still have to have the kind of the institutional knowledge of how your company runs. So if it just bring this to absurdity, just say the CEO manages to make his workforce 99% AI, just say thought experiment. When he retires or she retires, who replaces them? And would they be able to I think human oversight is still needed overall company operations, logistics, marketing, or whatever. You still need to usher in people. So if anything, you should just use AI as augmenting the workers you have, as opposed to trying to replace them because it seems there's a short-term benefit to cutting your workforce for sure. Maybe perhaps the long-term health of your company is is at stake with that kind of thinking. And yeah, of course I agree with you. If you don't have people working, they can't buy your product. So there's ideas of universal income, and I don't know. It doesn't sound good to me. I think people.
I mean, universal income, I mean, in theory, it all sounds nice, but then the question is who's going to administer that? Who's going to decide who gets how much? And do you really see folks owning the large tech companies? Do you really think that they're going to be like, okay, let's have an equitable distribution of this? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Strong economies are local, and they're lived with people around you, and you kind of see the blood, sweat, and tears that are in your area. You can't really. It means like people find meaning in work and meaning in salary, and that's what drives economies. You can't just get rid of that. There's no money to give them. There's no money to give them. They have to earn it, right?
Because that then, if, I mean, like hypothetically speaking, if everybody had a universal basic income, I think especially in the U.S., there'd need to be a lot of rethinking in terms of where people do find meaning now. Because in the U.S., I think everybody is sort of identifies with their job to a large extent. Now, if you look at other cultures, like I think in Europe, for example, I think there's much less hardcore identification with one's work. And so I think a UBI scenario, people would really need to find meaning in something else, whether that is their families or their children, or like a beautiful garden, or creating art or literature, or curing a disease or something.
I just thinking like essentially what a retirement should be, right? I should
Hmm.
get out the oil paints and open up the sunroom and just paint all day. But am I going to find meaning in that?
Hmm.
I think the whole idea of, say, communism in the USSR was this, it's everyone works for each other. You work for the state and we all take care of each other. And it grounded to a halt because there's a lack of carrot being dangled. You don't do it for a greater good. You tend to do it for the carrot that's in front of you. And that's just human behavior. And that is the argument for capitalism, at least at that scale. Of course, we know that capitalism is progressing into this insane thing, which is why we want AI, or companies would want AI to streamline things. They want to trim the fat. They want to, just like they brought the factories to China and so on and so on.
And I'm just going to say, from like a learning and education standpoint, I mean, I look at AI and I think, oh no, my kids are not going to know how to memorize stuff, and they're going to rely on AI and screens for too much, and they're not going to really read and things like that. But then I also think, like, weren't people saying that about the printing press, that, okay, so now we're printing books, and oh my God, people are not going to, they're not going to learn how to memorize all the songs and things like that. So I assume that every new technology is going to freak people out to some extent, and you'll get people worried about how it's going to mess up the minds of the next generation.
Yeah, I think it was either back to Plato or Socrates. Was with they believed in oral philosophy. You get on the town square and you memorize all this stuff, and you speak to the masses. And if you put philosophy in print, then you lose a sense of ownership there, right? And of course, when the internet came and apparently everything was supposed to be available online and you could just Google your answers, apparently, then that was going to, change the way people do research. They can't go to the library anymore and crack open a book. But turns out we still need knowledge. Is not just information. Knowledge is information that's passing through your being somehow, right? So even if you're just reading it or Googling it or AIing it at this point, or using AI to synthesize information for you on your behalf, if you don't look at it and you don't process it through yourself, it's not knowledge. So knowledge is still very deeply it's a human thing, and there's meaning attached to it. You know it because it means something to you to know it, in a sense.
I think there's something to, if you learn something, I think it's also important to put it into practice. And whether that's like, if you've learned a philosophy, maybe you need to talk about it with another person. Or if you've learned a technique to do something, like I could read a Python book, but if I don't actually build a piece of software, did I actually learn Python, or was I just exposed to Python?
Yeah, it's that idea of having the knowledge well enough to be able to apply it in different contexts, right? Reading about how to ride a bike is not like riding a bike. doing a speech in front of your community about something, I don't know, is the experience of that, the rush you get, the nerves you get, that's knowledge of experience, of participating in the real world with others. I've been into this guy named John Vervaeke. He's a Canadian cognitive scientist, and he talks about we're in the meaning crisis right now. And so he talks about 4 ways of knowing, and what AI currently does well is propositional knowledge, like the content you can read on a screen that AI produces or Google's. And then there's riding a bike is like procedural knowledge. You know how to ride a bike, or know how to copyright or write a engaging piece or whatever. That can somewhat be, some skills can be done by AI, but then that idea of perspectival knowledge, where you just, you know what it's like to score a goal on the soccer pitch, or catch a football in the end zone, or that participatory knowing. You know what it's like to serve coffee to your customers in the morning. AI can't experience that because it's not an agent that has meaning.
Yeah, well, AI is stateless, which means that it's like the guy in that movie Memento, where his memory resets every 10 minutes. So, and you can help AI by giving it, notes and data and things like that to help it, to give it context. But it exists in like a little tiny fragment of time. So I don't think it has the ability to gain experience and actually learn. Like, we can create the illusion of learning, again, with giving it lots of what people will call scaffolding, which would be lots of, good system prompts and good data sources, and, applying it in the context of well-defined processes. But ultimately it is not, it can't learn.
Right, because it didn't derive any meaning from it. It can't get bored
Yeah.
of a process. It can't be excited by a process. It is stateless. The one thing I noticed, I saw an advertisement from Morgan Stanley, and they talked about the state of AI now is, it is very much zeros and ones. It's bits and bytes, as they're calling it. But they're releasing a humanoid. They're calling it the Humanoid 100 ETF, an index fund. They can invest in, companies are like the big companies that have just got a boatload of money from the U.S. government, your Zuckerbergs and whoever else. They are looking at embodied AI. So, and the way they're going to get their training data for these things is people who wear Meta glasses, and they're not training on bits and bytes anymore. They're going to be training on what they say is photons and atoms. And so we might have agents that can navigate space, and I'm not saying they would have a sense of state. They won't be like conscious in any way or sentient, but there's at least be able to do more procedural things in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of going from the sort of the generative AI that we have on our computer screen, that's purely conceptual, and then you're basically you're plugging it into a robot. So you have more of a robotics situation going on. And with the robot, one thing that's interesting is, okay, so AI is non-deterministic. So this means it's never going to give you the same answer twice. It's always going to be a little bit different. Even if you give it the same prompt and the same training data, it's like if you ask AI for an image and then ask it the same prompt again and again, you're going to get a different image every time. But if you have something, like a robot, and you just need to, I'm just curious how the non-determinism is going to work with like a robot that's doing things, and it can't like every 10% of the time decide to, if it's, let's say it's carrying a tray with medication on it to a hospital bed, it can't drop the tray 10% of the time, but if it's non-deterministic, it could very well do that. So I think I think that you can get with a AI, at least in its current form, you can get a certain amount of the way there with like a robot. But I think you're going to run into some hard limitations unless you're able to make it more deterministic somehow, and keep it from running amok.
Yeah, or just giving a greater sense of context. The living being context is, there's a lot more going on around us that tends to keep us on the guardrails or off the guardrails, that a sense of desire and self-preservation and, human things. I want to move towards the end of our conversation a bit, but I really wanted to ask you, as a parent, we did touch on it a bit earlier about some of the things that you do with your kids and how you think about AI with them. Like, what insights do you have, or what ideas do you have on how to raise kids in this day and age, and so that they're productive or have a sense of meaning in life in 5-10 years? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, and this is, I think every parent struggles with this, but I'm trying to get them off their screens to a certain extent and get them outside. And my husband, who does a lot of our farm stuff, he's very active in that as well. And I'm encouraging them to get to know stuff in nature, to, we've got a little pond, to have them look at the frogs. And we do, my daughter and I go on bug identification walks where we go look for, actual bugs and take pictures of them and figure out what they are. And so I think making sure kids have some connection to the natural world is helpful. And I understand that I'm very lucky having the access to the natural world, like right outside. I know a lot of folks don't have that. And I think I try to encourage my kids to do creative stuff. So if they're on their iPad, I'd rather have them draw and Procreate than watching YouTube. And I try to encourage them to have kind of their own just pet projects that they can do if they get a little bit bored, and not necessarily spend the entire time on Roblox. I mean, when I do stuff with AI and the kids, usually, if I created a spelling bee app for my daughter, who's a serious into spelling and really wants to attend the National Spelling Bee next year. She came close. She was second in the state, but I have an app that she can talk to, and it will give her spelling words, and it will understand how she spells them and things like that. And she likes it okay, but she gets bored of it eventually. She doesn't like the robotic voice, and she would usually rather have her friends ask her words because she wants to hear the natural human variation, so that, if the pronouncer at a spelling bee is going to make a small mistake, that she's still going to recognize the word, that she's not going to get conditioned to hearing like a perfect AI pronunciation. So yeah, but I think it is an ongoing challenge as far as making sure that kids don't get lost in the screen and all the AI generated content that's out there.
Yeah, so really it's just staying connected to the real world. But even like when you were saying going on bug identification walks, my wife and I were talking a couple of weeks ago just about, when I needed to learn to tie a tie, my dad wasn't around. I lived in a different city at the time. And I was just thinking, I think he would have just taught me how to do the single flute. There's the style, but I can go on, but I went on YouTube and I learned I could do the single flute or the half Windsor, the full Windsor or whatever. But I learned that from YouTube. And I was just thinking, like, what a moment, what a lost moment. You get a meaningful moment it could have had if my dad taught me how to teach the tie to tie. So I think that idea of connection to nature, but also to others in your community and using your hands and building, I don't know, being creative, or just having a discipline or a responsibility or a sense that you can not change the world necessarily, but you can certainly make life better for those around you in real time. I think kids can derive meaning from that, just like we do in our jobs, I think. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I do worry about like what economy are they going into?
Yeah, well, it's difficult. I think both my kids are kind of on the college track. My daughter wants to be a psychiatrist, and my son wants to be a lawyer. So in theory, those jobs will still be there, but I feel like things are changing so fast. It almost doesn't make any sense to worry about it, as long as they're growing up to be kind of, they have critical thinking skills and they're good, responsible little people. Then we just have to play it out and see where we are when they're college age.
I did interview a lawyer on this podcast, and she said the thing is about law, it's when you argue in any legal battle, it's over how to interpret a policy. It's to iron out the ambiguities of life as it's being judged by a law or a policy. And so AI can't really corner that. You know what I mean? It can certainly, it can synthesize a list of things for you, and you could use it to interpret things for sure. But in the end, you still need the oversight. You need to be able to make the final argument. And hopefully it is better than the other person's.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that especially if you're looking at like a jury trial environment, or even if you're talking to a judge, that there's also an appeal to emotion sometimes. That in theory the law is supposed to be about the facts, but not always when you're making an argument. So I think certainly that aspect of things is probably beyond AI as well.
Yeah. And whatever fallibilities humans have, like AI might be able to help with that, but maybe it's like a perfect union, AI and humans still tackling ambiguity, but still humans leading the way, you know? All right, Karen, our hour is up. I hope I'm taking too much of your time. Is there anything else that I didn't touch on or ask that you want to mention?
No. I mean, I think we had a nice kind of wide-ranging conversation, so this was fun. I'm glad that we finally got a chance to connect.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the podcast. And I'm looking at some of the things that you're developing. I'm curious about how you might be able to manage my emails and at least my Substack subscription. So if you sell that to Substack, let me know.
The info was out there.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks so much.